July was the hottest ever month humans have experienced on Earth. How much would you like to see national cut emissions in your first 3 years if you're in government?
Well, I'm deeply committed to net carbon zero 2050, right? I mean, that's the thing, and we as a previous government signed New Zealand up under the Paris Agreement to those commitments, and I feel very strongly about it. Every time as a business leader, I did it at Unilever, I did it at New Zealand, made really strong commitments in sustainability and around climate change in general. So I feel very connected to the mission and the purpose, and don't be under any illusion that I'm not committed to that goal. But the means by which we deliver that will be very different from this government, because I think there's been a lot of bumper stickers and a lot of easy headlines, but actually not a proper plan of execution that actually delivers and marches our emissions profiles down. So a lot of it is determined upon the rate by which we deliver it, is determined upon some decisions that we get to make. You know, I personally believe we need to double the amount of renewable energy in New Zealand, but when you go through that and say, well, what could a government do about that? It turns out that our resource consenting process is making getting renewable energy projects up and running incredibly difficult. It took 8 years to consent a wind farm that took 2 years to build that powered up 100,000 homes. So a lot of the rate will be determined by how quickly, because I think we could bend that emissions curve and go faster if we could actually get some of these policies implemented in a way.
So the Paris Agreement gets us to net zero 2050, but it also says we've got to cut emissions by 7% per year and nationally by 50% by 2030 if we're going to get there. So we've got to have targets, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Is National on board for 7% emission cuts per year and 30% by 2030?
Well, we should be. We should be trying to deliver on those commitments, that I'm very committed to delivering on those commitments. But I'm also trying to manage a situation where we've seen a ridiculous situation, I think, frankly, from the government that wanted to kill a fifth of sheep and beef farmers in a very short period of time, sending production overseas, but not making greenhouse gas emissions any better, and actually making every Kiwi poorer along the way. And I actually think we can sequence things in a way that actually gets us to where we need to get to, but ultimately the rate as we go through that will be determined by how quickly we get those actions away.
So on He Waka Econoa, because you disagree with the government over sequestration and also who should be pricing the emissions, and you said the government has blown this thing up, it's dead now. Do you think you contributed to possibly polarising the issue? Because the two differences between you and the government were pretty minor, really. Who should set the price and some technicalities over sequestration. Do you think you could just fix those two things and get on with it rather than kicking the can down the road?
Well, look, I think we were being very constructive because we wanted to be very bipartisan about it, and we also liked the idea that the industry was coming forward with a solution. And so in May last year, the industry came forward with He Waka Econoa, which is its approach to how it would manage agricultural emissions down. The government took 3 months after receiving that report and then went and pushed it really hard to the point of actually saying essentially a fifth of our sheep and beef farmers.
They backtracked on that though after that.
Well, it was a hell of
the final two.
And they shouldn't have done that because the industry has been 2 to 3 years doing a whole heap of hard work to get all of that sector together to a proposition that actually in itself would have been quite hard to sell to the sectors. And the government then didn't need to do that after 3 months, blew it up and then tried to pooper scoop it at the end of last year. Our view is very simple. One is we need to give farmers all the technology and tools available. That's why we've got the biotech, harnessing biotech legislation changes that we want to make there, because we see issues like ag research not being able to get testing of ryegrass that's lower emission out of the labs. We see issues around methane inhibitors being available in 35 countries but not here in New Zealand, because we're asking farmers to do the job with one hand behind their back. So we've got to give them the technology and tools. Secondly, we've got to give farmers all the credit for the good stuff they're getting doing, and they've got to get sequestration benefits from that. And then thirdly, we get into agricultural pricing by 2030.
Do you have any examples of an industry that's been able to set its own effectively tax price?
Well, I think you've got to take an industry with you, and essentially, we're going to have a clear set of pricing principles with a pricing committee. They'll have ministerial oversight.
So who will be setting the price? The industry group or the pricing committee?
There'll be an industry group that will set the pricing piece, and then the minister will have an oversight to that, and actually ultimately have final say off on it.
Right. And so the Zero Carbon Act says we want to cut methane emissions by 10% by 2030. Is National on board with cutting methane emissions by 10%?
Yeah, and I think when I talk to the industry, they feel like they're making good progress in that regard. I mean, there's a lot that they're doing that actually feels that they actually feeling quite comfortable that they could actually possibly get there themselves with the actions and the activity that's already happening. My point is that New Zealand has actually put, as I said, made farmers do it with one job behind their back. We've actually villainised farmers tremendously over the last 6 years under this government. We haven't valued them. We have been the best farmers in the world. We need to continue to be the best farmers in the world. You cannot have a situation where you end up sending production offshore to a less emissions efficient country or farm.
Do you think there's any evidence for emissions displacement though? Because that's the argument that's often made, right? Is that we're going to be exporting our emissions overseas. Is there any evidence for that, do you think, or is that sort of
No,
speculation?
look, I think what we've got to do is just say, and I'm very clear-minded about it. We're going to deliver net carbon zero 2050. So then you come at the problem and say, well, once the problem definition's well defined, what are we going to do? We've got one half of our emissions. Actually, if we could double the amount of renewable energy and electricity, we'd take a third of our emissions off the table. That would enable transport and manufacturing to make the transition. We know what the innovation roadmaps look like over the next 10, 20 years to enable that to happen. Then half our emissions are coming from agriculture. There is no established innovation roadmap for that anywhere in the world. And so you've got to be able to say, we've got to drive through technology and tools. We've got to be able to give farmers the ability to get credit for all the good stuff they're doing. And then we'll introduce agricultural emissions pricing in 2030.
I've got a heap of questions I'd love to ask on climate, but I'm going to finish with one.
Yep.
I'm a young climate scientist, and New Zealand's currently tracking for 4 degrees of global warming. That is catastrophic globally, like untold human suffering.
Correct.
and it's apocalyptic for nature, the scale of climate change that we're heading for at the moment. So, like, here's a chance to maybe share some emotion. How much does this issue mean to you? Because at the moment, Labour hasn't really cut emissions at all, and it feels like with the lack of targets from national and super solid climate policies, we're going to just continue heading for catastrophic global climate change. And I think in 100 years' time, there's a lot of important issues for New Zealand now. But in 100 years' time, when people look back at your leadership now, I think they'll define you by climate change.
Yeah, so deeply committed to climate. Just go look at my record, in terms of what we built with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, first corporate, plan around, making sure we had climate change and sustainability thinking into the actual DNA and the heart of the company. Same, I worked really hard at Air New Zealand to do exactly the same thing, leading the charge. I had the full EV fleet back in 2015. I had Air New Zealand signed up to Modern Slavery Acts. I had a whole bunch of things happening around full sustainability embracing agendas there as well. I'm serious about it in the country, but the point is, what I observe in this country is an awful lot of talk and not a lot of planning and not a lot of detail. And so the question is, you have to put a plan together. That's what we do in the National Party. That's what I've done in my life, is put the solution together to deal with the problem that we've got. And so, as I said to you, you can talk about climate change all you like, but at the end of the day, this government has said it's 8 years to consent a wind farm that takes 2 years to build that powers up 100,000 homes. That's a very simple challenge. So the question is, what can I do in government? Well, what I can do is say it's going to be 1 year to mandate to actually resource consent a renewable energy project.
But a lot more than just the wind farms.
I fully agree, but it's an example, it's illustration, because otherwise we're having these lovely conversations with each other that go on for years and nothing is happening. Nothing is happening.
I completely agree, nothing's happening.
That is utterly unacceptable, right?
Yeah.
So either you're serious about solving climate change, or you want to keep talking about it, or you do something about it.
So what would, at 2030, a failure look like for national? Let's say you're the government that takes us through the next 6 years of crucial global of time.
I want to start to see a real transition around
in terms of the number of emissions reduction. Now, if we didn't hit 50%, would 10%, 20% be a failure for national?
Well, I mean, we've got to get on the pathway to 2050. So it's just a matter of maths, and it's a matter of actual implementable decisions and actions that are taking place.
2050 is important, but 2030 is more important, right?
2050 is the commitment that I'm deadly serious about delivering and making sure we deliver upon, right? So that's the one we've signed up for. That's the one we've committed. Yes, there's lots of gateways along the way. I get that. But at the end of the day, 2050 is the one that I have to nail and actually deliver, right? So the question for me is, there's no reason why I can't come into government and say it is 1 year to consent renewable energy projects. That would help. It's a third of our emissions off the whole of the country by making that transition alone. And instead, what have we got? We've got a government saying it's going to build Lake Onslow for $16 billion of taxpayer money. And instead we've got an industry that says it wants to invest $25 billion in renewable energy projects, and it's not doing it today because it's got an externality in the market of the government saying it wants to be an interventionist and actually do Lake Onslow instead. So they're holding off on the sidelines, not investing when they're ready to go and they're great projects to invest in. So I'm trying to give you, I know we're in the detail, but the detail is important, because otherwise all we're doing in New Zealand, I'm over it, we do so much talking about stuff and we get very little done. And it's time to move into action mode, because we need to turn the country around and we've got to get stuff sorted.